Good morning. Wonderful to see you this morning. Right before service, Mark and Tina were showing us they have a brand new grandbaby. What's his name again? Theodore. They have a brand new grandbaby named Theodore. Everybody give them a round of... Anybody have any new grandkids this year? Anybody raise your hand if you have any new grandkids? There's some new grandkids. Awesome. New kids, maybe? Kids? Awesome. I was kind of thinking about this message this week, and as I was putting it together, I started looking at the Social Security Administration puts out this list every year, right? And it's a list of the most popular baby names from the previous year. And so this morning, what I want us to do is I want us to start by playing a little bit of a game with one another, okay? So here are the top 5 boys' names from last year, okay? They're not in order, but here's what I want us to do. I want you to guess what the most popular boy's name last year was. I'm going to count to 3, and when I get, I'll go 1, 2, 3, and then I want you to say it. You ready? So here we go. I want you to look at it, figure out which one you think is the most popular boy's name. And then we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and then you yell it out. You ready? Everybody got it? All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Ooh. All righty. Here we go. Most popular boys' names. We're going to start with 5. Okay? Most popular boys' names last year. Number 5, Elijah. Number 4, James. Rick lost. Number 3, Oliver. Number 2, Noah, which is interesting, right? The most popular boy's name last year, newborn babies, the most popular name was Liam. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so girls' names. Here are the most popular newborn names for girls in 2023. Which one do you think is number 1? Which one do you think is number 1? Let's try it again. I'll count to 3. You yell it out. You ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. Here we go. We'll start with number 5. Number 5 is Sophia. Number 4, Amelia. Number 3, Charlotte. Number 2, Emma. Number 1 is Olivia. All right, very good. Over the last several weeks, we've been looking at all these original followers of Jesus, and we even talked about how we've got some really popular names that are there, even back then, which were like James and John. And as we read through the New Testament, we're always having to try to figure out which James they're talking about or which John they're talking about because those names were really popular. And so I wondered, as I was doing that, I wondered where those names would rank on that 2023 list. So, Andrew is 65th last year. Simon was 248th last year, and Peter was 210 last year. James was 4. John was 26th on the list. Philip was 499 on the list. Nathaniel was 720 on the list. Thomas was 41 on the list. Matthew was 32 on the list. And yes, even Thaddeus made the top 1,000. Thaddeus was 903 on the list. But you want to guess which name did not make it? Of the apostles, the name Judas did not make the list. Anybody want to guess why? Right? But Judas is actually a good name. Judas is a good name because it means praised or it means thankful, right? So that's a good name. It's not that it's a horrible thing to name your kid. It's actually a Greek rendering of the name Judah, which was 176 on the list. We anglicize it, and we came up with the name Jude, right? Which is 161 on the list. But no Judas. Why is there no Judas? It was a popular name back then, back in the day. It was a very popular name because of this Jewish hero whose name was Judas Maccabees. He was a priest who ended up leading this revolt against the Seleucid Empire, and it was about 160 years before Jesus' birth. So it was a very popular name in Jesus' day. So it's a good name. It was a popular name. It was a name back then that conjured these feelings of national pride. Well, what happened to it? Because today the name Judas doesn't mean praised, does it? Today Judas means betrayer. That's what we associate with the name. Very similar to, like, in the United States, do we name our kids Benedict? Why don't we name our kids Benedict? Over in Britain, they still use that name, right? But in the U.S., the name Benedict became unpopular because of Benedict Arnold. He was a general in the Revolutionary Army. He was a friend of George Washington. And for a promise of 20,000 British pounds, he betrayed his country and surrendered West Point to the British. He actually only got 6,000 pounds. Well, Judas is kind of similar because he's known for betrayal. I tried to figure it out this week. Nobody really knows what Iscariot means. The popular theory is it's a reference to his hometown, which means it could mean a man from Keroth, which is a town in southern Judea. But man, I'll tell you, I was studying this week, and today's message is probably the hardest in the entire series. Because each of the people that we looked at, even though they had issues, each of them in the story actually showed redeemable characteristics, right? I mean, everybody we've looked at so far, there was this positive thing. There was this redeemable characteristic about them. Even when Jimmy preached about Thomas, there's Thomas who doubted, but then after that doubt was addressed, what became of Thomas? Like, Thomas became this amazing life, right, in service of his God. And so today we're going to look at a person in Judas Iscariot. And I want to point out just 5 things. I think I put down 5 of his life and his example that we need to remember. The first thing I want you to remember is that Judas, he was chosen by Jesus, right? And we need to remember that. He was chosen by Jesus. He's on that list, right? He's on that list in Luke 6, 12 through 16. We read it. On one of those days, Jesus went out to the mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, who he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Judas was not only called as a disciple of Jesus, he was chosen to be an apostle of Jesus. He was brought into and up into the ranks of leadership. So where did it go south for Judas? What was it that led him to turn against Jesus? Because he was called by Jesus. One of the things we find out in the New Testament when we look at his character is even though he was called by Jesus, he was greedy. Judas loved money. In John chapter 12, we're told, as Jesus visits his friends Lazarus and Mary and Martha in the town of Bethany, it was the night before Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. We read this beautiful thing where Mary takes this jar of very expensive perfume and she breaks it open, and as an act of love and worship, anybody remember what she does with the perfume? She washes Jesus' feet with it. And then as she washes his feet with it, then she uses her hair to dry and to clean his feet. And a beautiful act, right, of worship of Jesus. And what does it do to Judas? It infuriates him. It infuriates him. And he uses this excuse that, hey, this money could have been used to feed the poor. But anyone know what the real issue there was? We're told that he was actually he was skimming off the top of the funds, right? John writes in John 12:6, he was a thief. And as the keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. This is why he gets mad at Mary's act of worship, because she's pouring out, we find out, a year's worth of wages on Jesus' feet. And as she does that, from Judas' perspective, what is she doing? She's taking money right out of his pocket because he's a thief. And his priority is not the poor, and he didn't care about the people. He loved the money. 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. See, I think this was the part of what made Judas wander from his faith. And I think it was more than that. The reason being is it had to be about more than just the money, because Judas could have gotten more for his betrayal. In Matthew 26:14 and 15, then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. 30 pieces of silver. It's relatively a small amount of money. That would be somewhere between $600 and $900 today. He betrayed Jesus for somewhere between $600 and $900. Now, to give that a little bit of context, in the Old Testament, when Delilah sold out Samson, she got 5,500 shekels of silver. That would have been somewhere around $30,000. Yet with Judas, there's no haggling. There's no counter offer. He just accepts 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver was the price for one slave. He was also impatient. I think it's his impatience that also led him to his betrayal. I can't help to believe that though Judas signed on to be a disciple of Jesus, maybe he did so for the same reasons that many of us sometimes get involved in things, right? It's easy for us to get involved in things when things ultimately lead to our benefit. When we see something as being beneficial to us, it's very easy for us to get involved in those things, right? When there's immediate benefit. And what was his immediate benefit of being a disciple? And he's the one that got to carry what? He got to carry the money. He got to be the one to spend the money. The ultimate benefit for him was that. He believed, I think he believed Jesus was Messiah. That was an undeniable fact. In their mind, the Messiah was coming to restore the kingdom of Israel. The Messiah was coming to be an earthly king like David. They would bicker over who got the closest seat to him, right? They were thinking about actual seats in a restored Israel that was coming soon. And they believed Jesus was going to march into Jerusalem. And what was he going to do? He was going to take over. And they had seen his power. They had seen this guy heal. He had the power over weather and the elements. This guy could raise the dead. So when it came to a battle against the Romans, man, they were convinced that he was going to win hands down. So though it was hard right now, I think from Judas' perspective, though it's hard right now, man, when Jesus kicks out the Romans and becomes the king of Judah, we're going to be his royal court, right? That's what we're going to be. We're going to be his cabinet. Man, we can be hard on these guys, but at times, are we any different? We want to be a part of things when we perceive them as being successful. And success is whatever benefits me. Whatever benefits me in a worldly way. Success is when I feel good about it. As I read this and I think about it, what if Judas stayed on only as long as he believed it was going to go where he wanted it to go? As the last week before the Passover plays out, Judas begins to realize this isn't heading where he wants it to go. This is not heading toward Jesus taking over Jerusalem. And he starts seeing his rabbi getting in more and more trouble as the week goes on. And I think it's when he came to the realization of what was going to happen. He decides to very simply cash out. Did you get that? Because ultimately he was in it for himself. And there are a couple different places in the scripture that says there's actually a point there where Satan enters him. But understand, it's not like he got red glowing eyes and started speaking in a deep voice. That's not what that's talking about. It was that point when he let his selfishness determine how he was going to deal with this and approach this. It's when he made the decision to leave Jesus because Jesus was not what he expected. He was also good at being fake. And what I mean by this is that none of the other guys called this. None of the other disciples noticed what was wrong with Judas. It wasn't until they were sitting there at the Last Supper and Jesus brings it up that they realized that Judas is the betrayer. We're told in John's account of the supper that Jesus says that one of them is going to betray him, and they're all shocked. And they have a loss for words. And Peter whispers in John's ear. This is because John was right next to Jesus and asked him which one of us he's talking about. And Jesus said, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it into the dish." And then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." They had no idea that Judas was the betrayer, which means, man, you can look like you're a Jesus follower, right? You can look like you're a follower of Jesus and not be. You can be in the group. You can be a part of the group. You can share in communion. You can share in communion with Jesus and his people and already have in your heart how and when you are going to betray Jesus. He went and made the arrangements. He meets Jesus in the garden and kisses him on the cheek as a sign to the temple guards which one of the guys is Jesus. An act of betrayal that ultimately leads to Jesus' crucifixion. So Judas, the story of Judas is actually a cautionary tale because we find out what happens to him. He becomes so overwhelmed with what he had done that he goes out and he hangs himself, right? And this week, as I looked at this and studied this and thought about this, man, I'm like, compared to the other disciples we've looked at, those lessons were pretty easy. Those lessons were pretty easy because each person had something positive there to look at, to draw from. And this week, as I studied and thought about this, I'm like, okay, so what's the lesson? What can we learn from the life of Judas Iscariot? How can we improve our walk by looking at this guy's life? And so this lesson is a hard one. And the only thing I can do in my head as I looked at it, and Sandy and I were talking about this, trying to make sense of this, is to bring in someone who, in a lot of ways, is a parallel to Judas. In a lot of ways, has some similar failings to Judas. And that's Simon Peter. See, both Peter and Judas at points are said to be adversaries to the work of Jesus. You remember when Peter said, no, you're not going to go to the cross, you're not going to die, none of that's going to happen to you? Jesus looks at him and says, get behind me, Satan. He calls him Satan. Never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And this was directly after Peter had made the confession that Jesus is Messiah, the Son of the living God. So both Judas and Peter betray Jesus. Judas by handing him over, Peter by denying that he even knew Jesus. And he did it 3 times. So what's the difference between these two guys? Why does Peter go on to be a man we know as the Apostle Peter? And Judas goes on to be known as a betrayer when they both were betrayers. What's the difference? The difference is that Peter ultimately humbled himself. Peter repented, while Judas gave in to the lie of the devil. And what is the devil's lie? God will never forgive you. That's the devil's lie. The devil's lie is, you're too bad to be forgiven. If people actually knew what you did, but something I want us to see this morning is that even the sin of Judas was forgivable, right? The sin of Judas was bad. It was a betrayal of Jesus. It was motivated by sinfulness. It even was said prophetically that it would be better for Judas that he would have never been born, right? But it didn't have to be that way for him. If Judas would have responded like Peter, that man and that name would have been redeemed. And so this morning, I just want you to think about this. How often do you believe the devil's lie? Maybe you've heard it in the mouths of other people. Oh, you'll never change. God will never forgive you. If people knew what you've done, man, they're going to reject you. What we see in Peter is that Peter came back to Jesus. Peter served as an encouragement to the other disciples. And so when it comes to our downfalls and our mistakes, even at times of our outright rebellion against God, though sometimes we can be like Judas, let's remember that Peter was not that much different. And let's choose to be more like Peter. Let's choose to bring our hurts and our faults to Jesus and let Him forgive us. And then we need to serve as a witness to others of the grace of God and encourage the other followers of Jesus. This morning, we're going to go ahead and sing a song of decision. If you want to make a decision to follow Jesus this morning, you come forward as we all stand up together. Jason Baker is going to come forward. He's going to stand up front and to greet you if you decide that you want to come forward and make a decision for the Lord today. This is a song about